My name's Harry Braun. I am an independent presidential candidate, officially, in terms of having my papers filed with the Federal Elections Commission. I actually started this presidential campaign of mine in 2016 more than a year ago, except a couple of things came up. One is the Democratic Party didn't want to have me in any of the debates or any of the exposure part of the effort, which was a bit disconcerting since I was the Democratic candidate for Congress against John McCain in 1984. And the person that, since I didn't win that election, I ran 2 years later against I should say Jay Rhodes, who was the son of John Rhodes. And I did so because these people were not because they were very popular. I did so because I was trying to make a point about the fact that our country needed to get off of the oil and nuclear industrial complex, which was contaminating the entire country and indeed the entire planet. And that we were accelerating into either a kind of a technological utopia of molecular biology and understanding how to this whole field of regenerative medicine, where you can regenerate any tissue in the body, brain cells, bone cells, blood cells, and it's being done today. This isn't just, oh, we're going to do it someday. I've seen it I've seen a person on CBS News with his hands cut off, fingers cut off, where the saw just whacked them right off, and they were able to use the stem cells in this person to get them turned on, and they regrew those fingers and exactly the way they were. And this was on CBS News, just one of the many stories that you hear. So this era of molecular regenerative medicine means we can regenerate all of our tissue, except we have a big problem. Because we are addicted to this oil and nuclear age, every man, woman, and child has been heavily contaminated. Every child, every man on the entire planet. This isn't just all Americans. This is people everywhere. I'm talking about the polar bears in the Arctic, and the birds in the Arctic, and the fish in the Arctic Sea have the very same chemical poisons in their blood as we do. And if you don't understand what these chemical poisons are doing to you, I'm going to explain it for you, since I am a senior scientist. And I represent thousands of scientists and engineers worldwide. I explained this to the Democratic Party at all, but they didn't care about this because this army of scientists and engineers, many of whom are professors, are all focused, and have been for going back 200 years now, in making basically shifting from this oil and nuclear economy to a solar hydrogen economy, where you're going to basically make hydrogen from water with sunlight in its various forms. That includes wind energy, which is right now the least expensive and quickest way to get a lot of renewable energy technologies up really fast. Wind is right up front. And as you can see, and welcome to my office, my big problem with political campaigns in the past is, and I did run for president in 2004. That's when John Kerry was running in the primary as a Democrat. The Democratic Party there was open. I was able to go into the debates, and although I never got I never got into the major televised debates. I was able to go and around the state, etc. But I never had any national exposure on this same basic concept of the images that you see behind me. Let me just tell you what they are, because right now we're addicted to this oil because people think there is no option. Well, we just have to have it. I mean, do you want your car to stop or something? And I hear that all the time from people who have no idea what they're talking about. So let me just tell you the facts. And being a scientist, and I'm a hard science person, let me just be very candid about that. If you tell me anything that violates Newton's laws of physics, I don't even consider it. I don't have time to deal with that kind of nonsense, in my view. So I'm a very hard science type guy. And you're going to be fascinated. You're probably going to think I'm an atheist because of that. But actually I'm not. In fact, I have a paper published on the revealing science of God that we're going to be talking about because it bears directly on this whole discussion. But right now I want to show you essentially the technologies. Well, everybody says they're going to, in fact I just heard President Obama just the other day say he's waiting for some 15-year-old kid to show up and come up with the new energy system. Yeah. Well, let me just tell you something. First off, this is not my idea. I am a senior advisory board member of the International Engineering Society that you're going to be seeing some of our members. Their work is on the back of my office wall here. And this has been known, everything you see up here in terms of the core hydrogen production technologies could have all been built in the 1800s. In fact, the very first automobile built in the world wasn't in the United States, it was in the country of Switzerland. And it wasn't running on gasoline because gasoline didn't exist back then. It wouldn't exist in terms of commercially being available to people in the remote communities of Switzerland for another 75 to 100 years. What were they using for fuel? Hydrogen. Because it was easy to make. It was easy to make because in the year 1800, a very eminent physicist named Volta, Alessandro Volta, invented the world's first battery that produced a predictable flow of electricity. First time that was ever done. It was so important of the day in the year 1800. It was at the World's Fair when Volta demonstrated this remarkable new product, the battery, and he explained how he built it. And 3 weeks later, a British surgeon, Sir Anthony Carlisle, and his good friend, who was an eminent chemist, whose name escapes me for the moment, I'm sorry, but they reproduced Volta's battery in their lab, and what they did was took the predictable flow of electricity and passed it through a beaker of water, which you could do on this desktop if I had a battery here with the two wires in the water. Essentially, they electrolyzed the water. That's in chemistry, that's called electrolysis or electrolytic hydrogen. That's the clean kind because you're making it from water. And if the electricity comes from the sun and the wind, then it's completely clean. Now if you make the hydrogen from coal, it's dirty hydrogen, and we don't want that. I think I'll take a drink of this water. The important point is, these technologies behind me, although they were developed in the 1800s, let me start with OTEC. You know about wind systems, and I just want to make this point. Wind systems alone, you don't need to worry about OTEC or anything else, or photovoltaic. Wind systems alone could easily power the entire country and the entire world quicker than any other technology we can deploy, with one exception, and I'll explain that one to you later. It's a biomass option that is, we're going to discuss that at some length. Because it all comes down to a question of what's the quickest, fastest, and most reliable thing we can do that would also involve employing millions and millions of our own people in every community. That's what this Phoenix Project plan is all about. Because if you're going to shift from an oil age to a hydrogen age, that means you're going to change every automobile that's now running. Whether it's a Model T, a moped, you got a gasoline lawnmower, you want to stop, you're going to modify all of those pieces of equipment. I'm going to show you people that have done it decades ago. It's easy to do. In fact, I have a video, here's my Phoenix Project DVD, that is on our braunforpresident.us website. You can watch it for free. And it's worth watching, I assure you. It's a low budget thing. I did it myself like I'm doing this myself. I'm retired now, but am the former CEO and still am the CEO of a wind energy development company. I'm still a CEO of it because they keep sending us checks. Because when we finished the project in 2005, if you get your contracts written properly, We keep getting royalties as long as the wind blows over this gentleman's property in New Mexico. Guy's name is Pat Boone. But no, he's not the singer, but the guy is really just as cool in terms of a really cool human being. He's a fourth generation cowboy, really, out living on this property, him and his family. And they were having a hard time out in this property because their aquifer's running dry. Things are really rough out there for the people living out there. And but this wind project made him wealthy and didn't do my wife and I any harm either, since she was with me at the time when we were putting this together. And it's a complicated piece of work. You've got to get integrated with the utility system, which means you have to do utility studies. Those are expensive. And you never know, it's a gamble, are they going to have enough space on the lines, all that kind of stuff. But that's what we did. We pulled it off, and then we got it done. And now we're going to keep getting checks essentially forever. As long as the wind keeps blowing over that site, you can always upgrade the equipment. It's a wonderful business to be in. I want to get the whole country, and indeed the whole world, in that business. And let me also explain something. When you do that, that's all in the public domain. Remember, it's been around for 200 years in terms of the core technology of what we were talking about. So nobody owns it. When we talk about running our country on a hydrogen economy, it's not going to be ExxonMobil and Exxon. They're going to be out of business. And unfortunately, they don't have any assets. They just have toxic poisons everywhere you look. They deal in poison. That's all they do. Same thing with the uranium and uranium mining and all of that stuff. It's just what they have. Well, let me just put it there. Let me sum it up this way. The scientists refer to the event of this 100-year use of oil. It really started in 1937, really. And I say that because that was the year they made cannabis illegal. They, meaning the oil industrial complex people. Oh, you didn't know that? Well, let me tell you, this is a well-known subject, thank heavens, because there were some professors of law who dug out the details and the truth of the whole rationale behind making cannabis essentially illegal in 1937. Over the objections of the American Medical Association, in very contentious hearings that I have the testimony on our Phoenix Project Foundation .us website if you want to read it. It's great reading. That was back in an era where the word marijuana didn't exist. That was a word that was invented. Actually, it was not. It was a Mexican slang term that nobody knew what it was. So the industrial group of people that needed to get cannabis off of the market, and it, it had nothing to do with smoking it or using it in that manner at all. The real issue had to do with Henry Ford, who was, and you all think he's just famous for mass-producing cars, but that's not what was the important things that he was doing. Was what he was running as those cars on as fuel, because it didn't come. They could run on gasoline. He modified them in such a way so that they could use gasoline. But his ethanol that he was making from his cannabis crops on his own property, as well as other farmers were growing it, it was the major cash crop in the country. It's been the major cash crop in the country since the Pilgrims landed and threw the bags of cannabis seeds off the ships, which every ship at sea had to carry just in case they had a shipwreck. What's the crew going to do? They're going to grab those bags of cannabis seeds and plant them immediately because A, they need the food. It's an incredibly nutritious substance to eat. It grows incredibly fast. But most importantly, all of the fibers that were used by the sailors are the strongest known fibers. And that's why they're made into what are called canvas, which is derived from the word cannabis, which is an ancient Greek word, because no ancient civilization that was a sea-bearing civilization, and you couldn't be a major military power if you weren't a sea-faring advanced civilization. All of those ships had mastered the cannabis technology of ropes. There were tons of ropes on every ship. All the canvas sails. The clothes were made. And these were clothes that would last a lifetime. It isn't like the cotton stuff. If you tried to put cotton sails on ships, you wouldn't get out of the harbor. It would be a joke. So this is something for 10,000 years, civilization, everything that was made of a textile nature came from cannabis. Henry Ford, and this is an amazing story that is easily documented on YouTube. All you needed to go is and look up Henry Ford's cannabis car. They called it hemp then. All of our founding fathers, when you read about in the National Archives about Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, they all called it the hemp economy. They didn't call it the cannabis economy. That was a scientific term that was picked up in the 1850s. That was somewhat after our founding fathers. So they used the old English Germanic term hemp. Actually, it's an old biblical term, as it turns out, all the way back to the Old Testament. And we'll be talking about that in future broadcasts because this is important. Because the whole cannabis civilization as it existed, that was so important that in World War II, even though cannabis had been made illegal in 1937, in World War II, the U.S. Department of Agriculture they produced a program called Hemp for Victory. The DEA tried to destroy this document, but fortunately there were copies that they found. And it's online and it's free. You can see it. Just type in Hemp for Victory. But now it's called a World War II propaganda film on the cover. But what it is, it's a documentary done by the Department of Agriculture to encourage all the farmers in the U.S. and they had suspended the ban, grow cannabis as much as you can, as quick as you can. We need it bad for the war effort. Okay, everybody got with the effort. In fact, they set up, they meaning the U.S. Department of Agriculture, as per the coordination with the U.S. Department of Defense, a public corporation in the United States that grew cannabis all up and down the railroad lines all across the country. And they put that cannabis on the railroads right away. It grows fast, get it on the railroads, and they shipped it back to DuPont Chemical Company. Huh. You didn't know about that. What do you suppose DuPont was doing with all that cannabis? Oh, this is really interesting stuff. DuPont had a cost-plus, no-bid, secret contract to basically nitrate the cannabis cellulose fibers into a super high explosive that was used in our military to win World War II. And it was secret at the time, of course. But cannabis was the source of the explosives, the TNT, all that really high-grade stuff in World War II. That's why it was so critical, because the supplies of cannabis that had been used had been cut off during the war. Then after the war, the government ratcheted up the cannabis laws even more so than they ever did. Oh, what they did in those hearings, I mentioned that the word marijuana came into this thing. Where'd that come from? Well, the Narcotics Bureau was set up by a guy named Andrew Mellon, who was a billionaire at the time, or multi-millionaire, I don't know. Billionaire in our day age, certainly. He was the richest guy in the country. He was also appointed Secretary of the Treasury by President Hoover. And he also was the president and CEO of Gulf Oil. And had good friends like with the Rockefellers and other oil people. The early oil industrial complex as it was. And that was a powerful group of people. And when they found out Henry Ford was making his ethanol that was much better for the engine. They were taking apart engines that had been used for like 40,000 miles, and you take the head off of the ethanol engine and looked like brand new. You take the head off the gasoline engine and it's all grimy and ugly. And gasoline's an incredibly, hideously toxic substance. I mean, most people have no idea how nasty it is. But if you read the technical literature from the oil companies on how to handle it if you're handling it, you need to be in a moon suit when you're filling up your car if you want to be safe. And if you're not in a moon suit, and I'll bet none of you are, you're not safe. You're absorbing the vapors and the fumes into your body while you're there filling up. And these are some of the nastiest chemicals you can get into your body. And I'm going to explain to you what they do to you, and it's ugly indeed. And it's not just you, it's your kids, Right now we have a problem. We're so contaminated, I'm sorry to tell you, and I'm going to document this extensively in this campaign. And this campaign, this broadcast is the introduction to it, really. I wasn't able to get into the Democratic part of it, so I had to basically wait until that score was settled. I had another thing come up. My wife has been very ill with osteoporosis, and she's had a number of very serious fractures, most recently in her back and in her hip. In fact, she's had 3 hip issues, and the most recent one was a major hip replacement that she just got through about a month ago. Successfully, I'm grateful to say. The last one, part of her bone died and it didn't work, and so she's been in a lot of pain and agony and having a hard time just getting around. And we live alone together and with our little dog AJ. But we are certainly, when I ran for president in 2012 against President Obama in the primary, she was with me the whole, and even in 2004. Lucy was with me when we were in New England. The 2012 campaign was interesting because the state Democratic Party in Iowa would not acknowledge our campaign, even though I was registered with the FEC and I had all that history of running as a Democratic candidate. They would not list me on their website, and they would not acknowledge me at all, and so the major newspaper wouldn't acknowledge me. My wife and I spent several months there, and we had a good time at the universities and had some great interviews. I'm working, I think, not only talking about this solar hydrogen economy. That's been my mission in life. That was my whole mission in my campaign against John McCain in '84, certainly. And that's because I was, by that time, by 1981, I had been invited to be an advisory board member of this International Engineering Society, the International Association for Hydrogen Energy. IAHE.org is the acronym. And all of my colleagues here, the colleagues that developed the OTEC plants, for example, or the Hieronymus and Professor Hieronymus who developed these winship systems, he was and I worked with him for years. The guy was really remarkable. He was a naval architect, meaning he went to the Navy sent him to graduate school at MIT in naval architecture and engineering, and then he led the team to design the hulls for our nuclear submarines that we have out in the water. And but he retired, and then after he retired, before he retired though, he was appointed superintendent of shipbuilding for the Navy. And after he retired from that position, he then went to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where I met him, when he was working on these windship systems that you see here. And those windships are like the sailing ships of the 1800s, as he would love to tell the story, meaning all you had to do is take off the canvas sails and put up the rows of wind turbines, wooden wind turbines. And the designs for all of that existed in the 1800s. So you could have taken a clipper ship, for example, just rework it, take the sails down, put the wind turbines up, and you're putting all the heavy equipment for making the hydrogen down in the hull of the ship, where all the weight is. Well, that stabilizes. It's like a big buoy. Makes it very stable. So these wind ships you put out at sea, and of course if you look at the hull underneath the water here, this is where, I don't know if this will help or not, but that's where the crew would be living and working. It's a lot like a submarine hull. And so this was an easy thing for Hieronymus to do. And he pointed out that these could easily run the whole country. And the amazing thing about and I'm in the wind business, so if you take for example, when you put a wind system out at sea, if it's 1 megawatt, rated at 1 megawatts on land, if you put that system out at sea, where the average winds go up by a factor of 2 at least, the law of the cube kicks in, and that means that same 1 megawatt wind turbine on land is going to produce about 8 megawatts at sea. And which is a huge, it's more expensive to put a system like this out there, but Hieronymus said let the Navy do it, let the Navy build it, let the Navy run it, let them operate it, let them take care of it. That's what That's what his recommendation was, and I absolutely agree with him, because remember, this is not for private corporations to be, we don't need them. All these trillions of dollars that are now going into the hands of private corporations who are multinational corporations, don't give a damn about our country, have no responsibility to deal with any of the issues of our country, and they have contaminated every man, woman, and child. Those corporate executives should be arrested. Except they bribe both members of both political parties, are in their pockets. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are both deep. They've been embedded. Well, Donald Trump hasn't been. The only reason I say they gave him $2 billion of free media coverage, which was more than all the other 17 candidates combined. Why did they give Donald Trump all that massive amount, $2 billion of free media coverage? And when I say they, you say, well, that was the news networks. Yeah, well, who do you think owns them? Who do you think actually owns these news corporations? I'm talking about controlling interest. Corporations, oil companies, with all these vast amounts of wealth that they have, and it's truly vast, because and what they can do is set up, and they do, shell corporations of all kinds, put a lot of money in them, they go buy an interest in that corporation, and now you run it. And I know that because all you have to do is look at outfits like CNN and CBS and NBC. You don't get any real news out of these organizations. They're mostly roadkill stories or entertainment stories. I want to keep you entertained. But the serious stuff, they don't talk about it at all. And let me give you an example. We keep hearing, I just see this, here's a Time magazine. All a bunch of dead people who got killed in Orlando. And the big question is, why did they die? Let me tell you, The World According to Braun, which was the title of a paper, or of an essay by a journalist, when I ran against John McCain. It was a good one. I'm going to read it to you later on, not today. But it was well written. Those people died for oil. Nobody talks about it in the news. We say it's always the Islamic radicalism. That's what's the matter with their Muslims. That has nothing to do with this issue. That's you're completely missing the point of why these people are doing what they're doing. And people who don't understand, and Donald Trump has no idea. He said it many times. He said, we have to have a special commission set up to figure out why these people hate us so much. Really? Well, I'm a student of history, always have been. Before I went into my more technical fields, I was doing historical analysis of our country and foreign policy in college and graduate school. And I didn't like what I read. Let me tell you what, when you get past all the hoopla, how wonderful and exceptional we are. Let me tell you what we really do, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about Republicans or Democrats here. They're all from, since I've been alive, certainly, and even before I was alive, the bankers and oil company people, they got us into World War I, for example. And we're going to talk about that. How they thought they were going to make a lot of money, and indeed the bankers did. And all these wars corporations make a lot of money. That's what it's all about, is making money. And we went to war against Iraq, not because they had any weapons of mass destruction, but because Dick Cheney's company, Halliburton, he spent 30 years embedding his company with these cost-plus, no-bid contracts, and they needed a war somewhere. And he knew that, in fact, there's a story about Chris Matthews that I saw on MSNBC, and Chris Matthews was talking about this source that he had, who said that Dick Cheney, right after he and Bush got elected, but before they were nominated, or actually sworn in as president and vice president, that he asked for a detailed dossier on only one country. This is long before 9/11. Guess what country that was? Could it be Iraq, which had some of the largest known remaining oil reserves in the world? So so he already had targeted Iraq. All he needed was an excuse. And when 9/11 came along, it wasn't anybody from Iraq that was in those airplanes. They were from Saudi Arabia. But that's all Cheney needed. The country was in a war hysteria. We had to go bomb somebody. And of course, the problem is we've been bombing people in the Middle East for 100 years now for oil. That's all we do is bomb these people for oil. We put in dictators, like in the country of Iran. The Eisenhower administration put in an ugly dictator, the Shah. And the guy they threw out wasn't a mullah. He was a professor of law who just wanted to renegotiate the oil contracts with British Petroleum. And the Brits responded by saying not only no, but hell no. And furthermore, if you continue with this insisting on this renegotiation of contracts, we're going to put a naval blockade up against your country and you're not going to sell your oil to anyone. And by the way, that's what they did until he was overthrown by the Shah, who they put in power, who was a horrible dictator, murdered and tortured all kinds of people, but did the bidding of our oil companies to extract those resources and make all that money. That's the kind of country we are. John F. Kennedy did the same thing in the country of Iraq. It was our CIA that went in and put Saddam Hussein in power. And how do I know that? Because I read the New York Times. Now, it is true, there was no news about it in the time it happened, but 30 years after the fact, it was a front page story in the New York Times about how we went in, because this was all the Cold War stuff. Oh, gee, they were suspected communists in in Iraq that were leaning towards Russia. And so this was all Cold War kind of stuff. And Saddam was he was a brutal guy, and they gave him lists of our CIA, according to these reports from expert testimony, gave the weapons, the names of the people, and these were the elite of Iraq at the time. They were doctors, lawyers, left-leaning people, of course, scholarly kinds of people, and they were taken out of their homes and shot in front of their families. We did that, our country, under the Kennedy administration. Oh, of course, it was all in secret. So let me just sum this up. We've been mass murdering the Arab Muslim people for oil now for 100 years at least. We're dropping bombs every day. And these aren't normal bombs we're dropping. Let me tell you how stupid all this is. First off, we're running out of bombs. We've been dropping so many. We have, if you've been following this in the news, it hasn't been on the nightly news, but none of those electric news networks want you to know anything. But the reason we're going slow over there right now is because we're actually running out of bombs. They're expensive. They cost millions of dollars each to make these smart bombs and get them delivered to a target by a Navy jet and the ships and the whole infrastructure to get these weapons on the target. And these weapons cost millions of dollars each, and we're blowing up a pickup truck. And who are we blowing up? Oh, we think it's a bad person. But we really have no idea. And it's because they don't like us. We've been bombing them for 100 years, and you expect them to like us. They hate us, all right? Have you seen what we've done to their countries? We have totally destroyed the cradle of civilization for oil and oil companies. That's why we're there now. It's ironic. The United States only ended up with one small part of the oil pie of Iraq after the war. And maybe you don't know this because you probably don't read the New York Times. But if you... just in case you don't, I'll tell you, and this is why I read that. It's not that I agree with their editorial page on very much, but they do have some good investigative reporters. And what was very clear was the one company that got an oil lease in Iraq, and it wasn't a good lease from the big oil wells in the south, China got all of that oil. China. What'd they do for the war effort? They knew how to negotiate with the Iraqis. That's what they knew. They knew how to be nice, learn their language, their specific dialects of language, and wine and dine them, and they walked away with most of the oil. The one place that was some serious oil was up in Kurdistan. That went to a U.S. company called Hunt Oil. Hunt Oil, you say. Who in the hell are they? Well, it's a small oil company out of Texas. Turns out they're the biggest benefactors to George W. Bush. So if you think he's just an airhead, he wasn't all that stupid. He walked away with some serious money because the minute that deal happened, Hunt Oil flipped that deal over to Exxon and Halliburton for a lot of money. And remember, they're the biggest benefactors of George Bush and his libraries and his slush funds and whatever. That's the way it works. It's the good old boys, and they got away with it. But they mass murdered tens of thousands of innocent people in Iraq for this. What about them? If we're such good people, why are we mass murdering people every day for oil? And not only are we mass murdering them, We're mass murdering them now with weapons that are all uranium tipped, whether it's the machine gun bullets, whether it's the artillery shells, whether it's the smart bombs. They all have uranium-238 packed into the tips. Why do they do that? Well, for one thing, it's the major waste product of the nuclear industry. I don't know what to do with it. So they blow it up. How's that for a solution? That's one way to get rid of it, except you don't get rid of it. They're idiots. Here's what happens. When you blow it up, and you see that explosion and all this stuff, they test this stuff in a state I used to spend a lot of time in, Arizona. Out in the desert, they just blow these things up every day. Not too far from Phoenix. And what happens? That dust is now loaded with radioactivity of uranium-238. And it's one of the nastiest isotopes you're going to ever want to be associated with. And it has a 4.5 billion, that's billion with a B, year half-life. Now, I hope you heard what I just said. But when you're spewing these poisons up into the atmosphere that are going to be deadly for 4.5 billion years, that's the age of the Earth. And that's just a half-life. You need 10 half-lives for those atoms to get back to normal. Do you have any idea of the scale and scope of what we are doing? Because when that stuff gets up into the atmosphere and into the jet streams, it starts coming down in the rain over the United States in just a few days. Within 8 to 10 days, it's now part of the mix in the atmosphere because of a fundamental law in physics called diffusion. Like pouring cream into coffee. Once you do it, it's irreversible. And if you've got poison in that cream, it diffuses just as fast. That's why it's in all of us now. And it all started when they made cannabis illegal. Because had we been on a cannabis economy, we talk, when I was talking about Henry Ford, one of the many amazing stories about that story of Henry Ford is you probably know the plastics in our oceans right now, in our environment, are incredibly toxic because they're made from oil. And I remember thinking, God, why can't they make plastics from something that isn't oil? And then I find out Henry Ford in the 1920s was not only making plastics from the resins of the cannabis seeds. The resins are kind of an oil, except they're completely non-toxic. They're highly nutritious. Highly nutritious. In fact, when cannabis was being made illegal, the bird societies all showed up and said, "Oh, you can't make our cannabis seeds illegal. Our birds will suffer terribly. They won't sing anymore, and their colors aren't vibrant. They got to have their cannabis seeds." And they were so insistent that the members of Congress back then gave the bird people special authorization that they could get the cannabis seeds for their birds. Those cannabis seeds used to take care of the birds all across the country. Birds would flock from around the world to the cannabis that used to be wild, growing all in the United States, and it's all gone now. We've eradicated it. We've eradicated every aspect of it because it's in direct competition with the oil industrial complex. They had to put it out of business, but they've made the entire planet uninhabitable in the process. And we don't have much time left to turn this whole thing around. We have a lot of torpedoes in the water, and people like Donald Trump can say he's going to make a difference, but all I've heard him say is he wants to steal Iraq's oil and use our military forces to do it. That's how he's going to make America great again. So I can see why the oil industrial complex and the networks they own gave him $2 billion worth of free media coverage. But we don't need to be bombing it. We should stop bombing these people immediately, because all of the radioactive waste from these bombs, much of it's going to be coming down over us. How smart is that? With an isotope that's deadly for 4.5 billion years. Wake up. But it helps if you know the facts. I mean, has anybody ever bothered to tell you what's on the tips of those bombs we're blowing up every day that we're running out of? And of course it's going to take about 4 years for the new supply to come. And what happens if we get into a real war? Oh, we're out of bombs. Over blowing people up in a pickup truck, and you think the people we're blowing up are bad. But we have no idea who they are, do we? All I know is they're the Sunnis. And the Sunnis got screwed by us. By the Bush administrations, not us. I didn't do it. I had nothing to do with this government. I hate this government. I hate how it operates. President Obama mass murders people every day with those drones. I think that should be illegal, but he gets away with it. Man, he looks like such a nice person. Such a suave and debonair type person. Mass murders people every day, though. And how can you possibly know who these, and how many times were they wedding parties by mistakes? How many, when you're dropping 500-pound bombs with radioactive tips on them, so that bomb site's going to be radioactive forever as well. And who's the barbarian here? You think they're barbarians because they cut people's heads off? That's all they've got left. They're living in nothing. Their total civilization has been destroyed. Their lives, their families have been destroyed. They have nothing left except they want vengeance. They want vengeance against Americans because we brought this hell to their lives. And they want to die. Before they die, they want to kill Americans. That's why they hate us so much. If you don't know that, you need to open your eyes and stop bombing them immediately. In our own self-interest, stop the bombs. That's the only thing our government agrees and can raise money and do is bomb people. We don't build our bridges. We have the worst educational system in the world for any industrialized country by far. And we have a Congress and people like Donald Trump who refuse to have a decent educational system. Oh, heaven forbids we have a common national core of standards for all students so that they know, well, am I getting a good education or not? Oh, no, we want each little school district, thousands of school districts. Each little school district gets to decide what's worth knowing. Yeah, and you think you're going to compete with the Chinese? They're cleaning our clock because they don't think that way. I mean, they can build, I've seen where the Chinese can go and build a 38-story building in 48 hours. If you need something done, the problem is they're addicted to the oil and nuclear technologies even in a more horrific way than we are, and this whole process is accelerating this mass extinction event, the 6th mass extinction event in the Earth's history. And this technology that you see behind me that could have been built in the 1800s and could be rapidly built in our country now, we'd have to hire a bunch of people to go to work. But Lockheed is they've been building this type of OTEC system since the 1970s when this design was developed. Here's a cutaway of it down here where the crew live and work. Let me tell you why this plant's so important. The wind systems could make all the hydrogen we need, but here's what the wind systems cannot do. Our oceans are virtually dead. Oh, you didn't know that either? You can't even find a wild-caught fish in the store, and if you do, it's contaminated. Because we treat our oceans like a sewer. We have ships out there that they have a shipload of poison, and they just open the valve. It goes on every day. I'd have the U.S. Navy out there, and you can't sink these ships, but you got to stop them. We got to take control of our oceans and try to save what's left, and there isn't much left. The tiny amount that's left in New England that they put off in a sanctuary, you know, they said no more fishing for a while because all the fish are mostly gone. And now I read that they're going to repeat, the fishermen were so desperate, even though there's been no recovery, they're going to let them go back and even do trawling. And if you don't know what trawling is, if you want to destroy corals and ocean bottoms, you trawl, because these are gigantic ships that drag football field-sized nets that are weighted down. They hit the seabed floor, and then the ship just drags them along, and they crash into the coral forests that have been there for, you know, eons, and there's nothing left but rubble when they're done. Ocean destruction is what we do, and it goes on every day. It's the free market of the ocean. Isn't it wonderful? Well, it's a mass extinction event. That's why the oceans are almost dead now. We've got to try to save what we can. But we should have our Navy at the point of the tip of the spear to stop it. Our military forces should be protecting the environmental integrity of our country and our planet. That's what's important. That's where our military assets should be deployed right now, is to stop this. These systems are important because this OTEC plant it's not just that it's a solar plant in the ocean, that's what it is. The tropical oceans are the largest solar collectors on the planet. And that's what this plant, it's buoyed down here, as you can see. And these are basically the hot seawater, near 80 degrees, comes through these evaporators and flash evaporates seawater to steam. And then it expands through a turbine and creates electricity. That's one way you can do it. They can also use a working fluid. But in either case, then this cold water pipe that's part of every OTEC design that you see is necessary to complete the thermodynamic cycle. You've got to be able to then recondense that, and that's what the cold water that's near freezing, that's down 1,500, 2,000 feet below, comes up here and comes through these condensers to complete the thermodynamic cycle. But in so doing, it then takes all that seawater that's been essentially evaporated and recondensed, all the salt's now out of it. It's pure fresh water. Shiploads full. Every day. Fresh water. Pure water. With no salt or anything in it. It's a byproduct of this plant. And water right now on this planet is as critical as anything else there is, because the water everywhere in every community is contaminated, even the bottled water. It's not that you can't purify water, and you need to be aware. In fact, if you don't have a reverse osmosis water purification system in your home underneath your kitchen sink, you should get one. If you look around online, there may be $100, $150 for a good one. And you have to change the cartridges every year or so, but it really works. It even takes out the small molecules of pesticides that are some of the worst ones that you don't want to get that stuff in you, and they're everywhere. I mean, I live in a golf course here in Georgia on an old growth forest, and they spray 10 times more poison in these neighborhoods than the farmers spray on their crops. I got a bunch of doctors living around me, and they have no clue. They're poisoning themselves and their kids every day. All you have to do is hang around. And it's not just here in Georgia, it's everywhere. It's the way we live. We live in poison. We breathe it, suck it in all day. And I'm going to show you in the subsequent presentations the amyloid plaques that result from this. And they are nasty, because what you're doing is melting down the proteins inside of all of our cells. It's a random thing. You get the poisons in your blood, and they dissolve things. Just that's what these cleaners do. They dissolve things really well. Well, the trouble is when you get them inside of you, they dissolve your proteins into very super sticky blobs, and they start accumulating into bigger blobs, and then they start getting into all kinds of problems, and they cause a whole constellation of terrible diseases that you can see if you go to Wikipedia and just type in the word amyloid, A-M-Y-L-O-I-D, and it will take you to a page that will show you all of the constellation of diseases like cancer, dementia, autism. Little kids, babies, infants are now born with these amyloid plaques in their brain. Where part of their brain's melted down by the time they're born. Because the mother's womb is contaminated. And there isn't anyone who's escaped because of those immutable laws of diffusion. There's only one thing because of that we can do. Stop making poisons. Make it illegal to make or import poisons. We've got to do that. But we can't do that right now because the oil industrial complex runs our government. So, where is all this getting to? The technology exists. It's existed for 200 years. What doesn't exist is the way to make it happen. And that comes down to this democracy amendment. That's the whole point of my presidential campaign. And we're going to be talking about it at length. And it's not just an amendment that's only 28 words long that puts the majority of citizens who are registered voters in charge of the federal government. That's what it does. That's why it's only 28 words. I wanted to keep it as simple but as tough as possible in terms of teeth to give the majority the constitutional authority to take on the billionaires. You know, Bernie Sanders, and I love the guy, I sent him money, I sent him contributions more than a year ago. I really enjoyed how the campaign he ran, except what I didn't like was he never mentioned any of this what we're talking about. This is not just about getting a free education kind of stuff. Yeah, not only am I for that, you can get that right now, in case you didn't know it, and you can get it from MIT, and you can get it online, so you don't even have to go there. Right now. What are you waiting for? Why would you go and spend any money going anywhere else? That's the way it should be. Because the most important things you're going to learn in life, I think, you don't pay for. That's been true in my case, because most of it Of course, I represent thousands of other scientists and engineers. I have to be very candid about this. I didn't think up all this stuff. I'm just a student of all these people. But I've been studying it all my life. I haven't been building gambling casinos. I wasn't born rich. I've been working with scientists and engineers most of my life. And some of the best and brightest when I was at McDonnell Douglas, these were senior technical fellows. And we were developing some of the most advanced solar point-focused concentrator systems that have ever been built. I think they still hold the world's record in efficiency. The energy and the environment has been my world, but so has molecular biology and medicine, and how, because one thing I hadn't mentioned to you that's important to understand also is that the entire pharmaceutical drug industry was set up by the Rockefellers. When they invented pharmaceutical drugs in the 1930s, right around the time cannabis they had to get cannabis out of the market because it was cheap and it was very effective. And by the way, it was used to treat over 26 different conditions. And how do I know that? It's on the American Medical Association website. Go check it out. Go check out the American Cancer Society website about the history of cannabis in medicine. There is no other substance known that treats even 10 different things, much less 26. And these are all important ailments, including ulcers. Sanjay Gupta, who's a medical professor, also the senior medical director for CNN, did an extraordinary show showing how these little girls who were suffering terrible seizures, 20, 30, 40 seizures a day, many of them died. But in this one little girl that he was videotaping, they had a whole little table full of prescription pharmaceutical drugs that are all toxic, because they're all made from oil. You know, that's what the Rockefeller figured out was he could make 1,000 times more profit on a barrel of oil if he's making aspirin instead of gasoline. And they found the same thing out about plastics, because plastics had already been in use. Henry Ford was using them to make his cars. I'm talking about the hoods and fenders. He was also using the fibers for the carpets and the interiors. He made the whole car out of cannabis except for the steel fenders and the steel frame and of course the engine. But all of the other component elements of the car, and you can see these pictures of him on YouTube with a big axe, not a little one, hitting the back end of a brand new car, one of his cannabis Ford cars, as hard as, and other engineers younger than he at the time, whacking it even harder, and they didn't even leave a scratch. Now, imagine if you hit your car hood or fender with a big axe. Imagine the damage it would do. The axe just bounced off because the cannabis polymers were 10 times stronger than steel and dramatically lighter in weight. And he had it all figured, and Henry Ford even said, you can bury this car when you're done with it in your backyard. It'll fertilize the crops because it's all from, there isn't anything poison about it. And the fuel, because if you're making ethanol, you need, from a biochemistry, or in this case, chemical engineering standpoint, you first have to make hydrogen in order to make ethanol. You have to make hydrogen, you have to have hydrogen first to make gasoline. Hydrogen's in just about everything. It's in all of you. It's what holds our molecules all together. It's the original element in the universe, the most abundant element in the universe, the lightest element in the universe. That's why it's so safe. If you ever have an accident or leak, it goes up and away from you in a fraction of a second. Can't form explosive mixtures because it's already gone. And I'm not kidding, a fraction of a second is how fast those things happen. And Lockheed has done detailed work on how you modify every existing airplane. Every car, there isn't anything you can't modify to use hydrogen. And then our cities will be crystal clear, even in rush hour traffic. You can get down there, and because the air coming out of the exhaust of your engine is cleaner than the air that goes in, and you can collect the water vapor that comes out of your car and all the new vehicles will have this, I'm sure, where you don't want to just exhaust that water vapor to the atmosphere. You want to collect it in some nice glass or stainless steel bottles that you can easily detach and take in and drink and make coffee with, whatever, because it's the purest water you will ever see, because you've just reconnected the hydrogen and the oxygen in the inside the engine, and the exhaust byproduct is pure water vapor. That's the age that we want to get to. But we can't get to it until we first put the majority of citizens in charge of our country. And I know a lot of people in the documentaries that are going to follow. I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation for part of this because I want to show you the pictures. I think the pictures are really important. But I wanted to invite you to my office, and so at least you can see my world and my universe. And I want to get to the hydrogen economy with wartime speed. We only need 3 million wind turbines, 2 megawatts each, to run the entire United States. You can build those in 1 year, once the tooling's in place. What are we waiting for? Let's take charge. All that money is going to go into it's not going to go to private oil companies or private corporations. It's going to go into the U.S. Treasury because the majority is going to be in charge of how that money is going to be spent. And I'm going to do everything I can to convince that majority to stop the bombing immediately. We shouldn't be and we're in a new arms race now with Russia. And it's because of Hillary and Obama. They created, you think this issue over this war over in Ukraine just popped up from nothing? It's another oil war, pure and simple. In fact, they've got the dictator that took over in a coup over there while Hillary was Secretary of State and our government under Obama was financing this whole thing, giving them weapons because they wanted to sever all of those Russian pipelines that are coming from up north of Russia, through Ukraine into Europe. They wanted to cut Russia's throat. And that's an act of war, among other things, and we almost got into it. And Russia reacted like they did. They seized Crimea, and we as the United States have been in a hostile relationship with them ever since they got rid of their czar. And I don't understand why that is. Except, well, England didn't like it because they have a monarchy too. Except that, so what? I'm sorry the Brits still believe in monarchies. If you're born in the Windsor family, you're royal. But I think that's absurd. I don't buy into any of that. I understand why the Russians got rid of the Tsar. And they've done their best to try to create some sort of a democratic society. But and it's a lot better than it was under the Tsar, I can tell you that much. But it's not a real democracy. And I would like to help that transition, not only in Russia, but in China. Because we need all of these countries on board. We need the entire world to cooperate to get off of, we only need 17, when I said 3 million wind systems would run the entire United States in terms of energy, without using any more uranium, any more oil, any more coal, no more fracking, none of it. Stop it as quickly as possible with wartime speed. In fact, the quickest way, as Henry Ford pointed out, the quickest way to displace it all is to grow cannabis like they did in World War II, get it all next to all the railroad lines everywhere, and just get it going in everybody's farm, grow it everywhere. That's the key. That's the quickest and cheapest source of hydrogen. And by the way, you can eat it. It's much more nutritious than the bread or other foods you're getting out of the supermarket right now, because they're all packed with poison. Highly processed, hardly any nutrients left in them. We've turned our food to junk. All in one generation, all to benefit private corporations so they can make more money. The food has a longer shelf life, but it's dead food. The nutrients are gone. It causes disease, loaded with refined sugar. All kinds of stuff shouldn't be in there. All of that needs to change. And I'm going to talk about in detail how that's going to change and needs to change in every community, or else we're not going to survive the climate change chaos that's coming. So, but it's a clear path that we're taking. And I'm not going to keep anything a secret from you, like Donald Trump says he's got to keep things secret. Well, he's got to keep things secret, just like he told people at Trump University he's going to reveal his secrets if you pay the $3,500 or $35,000, I guess it was, for some of these gullible people. And then he later gets sued because there were no secrets, because he had none. And he admitted that in a legal deposition in that suit that he signed, that he was just a marketing guy. They were just using his name, and he was telling him he was going to hand-pick all the instructors, and he called them instructors and professors. They were really, they didn't even have college degrees at all, much less professors. But he tried to use the language of it's a school. It turns out it was never a university either. In fact, he's getting sued by the state of New York who repeatedly said you just can't say you're a university if you're not, and you're not. You have to be chartered, and you have to be peer reviewed. You just can't say you're a university. But he did, and thanks it doesn't exist anymore. Of course, that's another one of his bankruptcies. But the people who are suing him because he said he had secrets to sell and he had none. And he's saying the same thing now in the presidential race. He's got all these secrets that he's going to reveal when he's elected. But he hasn't got anything. I've heard what he's proposing. He's proposing tax cuts on the rich like himself. That's his solution to get the economy going. And stealing Iraq's oil, which is a felony, and more mass murder for oil. We don't need any of that stuff. We don't need a technically illiterate braggart who was born a rich kid, never had to work a day in his life, and that's why he acts like a tyrant, a little emperor type guy, because he was born into that. But most of the money he inherited, which wasn't billions, but and I don't know his real financial situation other than what I've been able to piece together, and I'm going to show you what I found out him in future broadcasts, where he was $3.5 billion in debt, and he likes to say he's the king of debt, and that's why his gambling casinos went broke in less than a year because of that debt. So he's got a long string of colossal bankruptcy failures. What has he done that's been successful? And if that's the guy you want as president, who has a colossal track record of failures, who's never had to work a day in his life, and now he's talking as though he's a populist guy, looking out after the little people, going to give them a tax break too. Oh, and then he's going to somehow balance the budget after giving everybody a tax break and starting a new arms race, and so he can go out and crush the opposition. And Hillary is her own con person in her own way, and we're going to talk in detail about her. She's the real billionaire in the race, and I'm talking cash money. And that was from the Washington Post. Over $2 billion before she even started this campaign, much of it raised while she was Secretary of State, doing illegal deals with oil and uranium companies. Deals that are treason to the American people. Treason, high treason. That both she and Bill did. And I don't know to what extent Chelsea is involved in this, but the FBI is looking into all of this right now. And they're going to be, Hillary's about due for her interview, and I think she's going to get indicted. And if she isn't, justice isn't working, because what she's done is clearly, or what Bill Clinton have done, calling their charity, while they're doing deals where 20% of the uranium of the United States got sold to a Russian corporation, which transformed Russia and Putin. They didn't even have enough uranium before that deal to even take care of their own nuclear programs in their own country. Now Putin's an international uranium arms superpower dealer selling uranium from our country to whoever wants to buy it. And the thing about uranium is, it's like oil. The only safe place for uranium and oil is to leave it in the ground, locked up in the Earth's crust. That way it doesn't bother anybody, doesn't damage anything. The minute you let miners start tearing it all up, tearing up the Earth, creating all that toxic dust that the wind blows worldwide, and those miners never clean their sites up, never. We have hundreds of our rivers. We don't have a river in our country that isn't contaminated. We've poisoned the whole place in one generation. And so we have to stop. And before we can stop, we have to get control of the federal government. And that is the mission of my presidential campaign. So I'm going to have a series of these broadcasts. I know they're a little longer than usual, but these are important subjects. And I have to explain to you, because I have to convince you of the evidence to ratify this amendment. And it's going to be really easy to do as voters, because the ballot to ratify this amendment is on our braunforpresident.us website. It's an Article 5 of the Constitution, which we're going to go into on our next broadcast in more detail. I'm going to show you the exact language of Article 5 because it deals with how you amend the Constitution. And we all know the Congress can do it, but we can do it without the Congress. That's what Article 5 says. We, meaning the majority people, can set up a constitutional convention in all 50 states, which my campaign does. That's why our presidential campaign is organized as a constitutional convention with a specific intent to, first and foremost, before you can elect me president or anybody else, is a real democracy with a real validated election with real paper ballots, which we don't have. We have phony elections with private corporations that count all the votes, and I'm guessing none of you people know who those private corporations are. Not the federal government knows, not the state. There's no oversight. Your votes are all counted in secret by unknown people who then announce the results to you. That's a fraud. All these elections in the United States are frauds. And you're gullible for believing it if you don't know who's counting the votes. In Canada, when they have elections, they have paper ballots. And everybody can see the ballots. They got news cameras all around. They're not done in secret. Everybody sees how they're being put in their stacks. It's all open and transparent. Not in our country. Well, that's what's wrong. We have a corrupt system from core to core. The Republicans are just as corrupt as the so-called Democrats, who are really Republicans. They just call themselves Democrats. But they take as much money from the oil industrial complex. And Hillary's been taking it from the oil people ever since her first Senate race I know of. Both she and Bill were taking it while he was president. And Bill's been in their pocketbooks of the oil industrial complex, and so's Hillary. Their whole lives. That's how they make so much money. But they're poisoning every man, woman, and child in the process and contributing to that. And that should be illegal. I think it is illegal. But now we need it. We need to empower the majority of citizens to get control of our judicial system so that it will work properly. So that when the Supreme Court does make a recommendation to the majority, we'll listen to it. But it's going to be the majority that makes the final say on anything that involves the laws that affect the majority of people. That's what this is all about. That majority is a universal mind of over 60 million citizens. I think they're a lot smarter than any single mind. And in order to educate them, it takes a little bit of time. But I assure you the information we're going over is in many ways very depressing, that's true. But as I've also pointed out, we're as close to a technological utopia of regenerative medicine and a hydrogen economy that will never run out. It'll last till the end of the earth. Because the green plants, all of the green plants, and the proteins inside the green plants that have been making hydrogen from water with sunlight successfully on a global scale for 3 billion years with no problems, no contamination. It just works. And we're going to just tap into that system with this technology that you see behind me. There's no secrets here. It's no more difficult to build that OTEC system than an oil tanker. Yeah, got to go employ a bunch of people. But when those tankers have accidents and you spill the hydrogen, nobody's going to care because it's completely non-toxic and pollution-free. It'll be completely, and then we'll be living in harmony with our biological life support systems of this planet. We have not been doing that, we've been poisoning them. And we're already paying a terrible price, and we may not survive it at all. I can't guarantee you that there's been a lot of damage done to this planet, and a lot of it cannot be stopped now. We have to get ready, and I'm going to show you what we must do in the next podcast. Please go to our website and leave comments if you can. If you want to make a donation to our effort, we would appreciate that. We also have a super PAC, Democracy Amendment USA, except this is a different kind of super PAC. We only are interested in the majority. This is a super PAC for the majority, and because we want to take money out of politics. When that Democracy Amendment is ratified, it will make bribery, i.e. lobbying, of elected officials illegal. That's what I mean, taking money out of politics. And these news corporations that now charge vast sums of money in political campaigns and shove it full of commercials to shove these commercials down your throat. Oh, that's going to change because those airwaves are publicly owned. That's who owns them, the public. And the government gave deals to private corporations to buy those up. Well, we're going to end that. So we're not going to have any money in politics. We're going to have situations like this where these are important issues. I wish I could make it happen quicker, but we have to go through step by step what we need to do. And I realize everybody's time is important. So I'm trying to keep this, at least this initial introduction, as brief as possible. But this is really important stuff, and we need to take action now. And maybe you've already heard enough to go to the website, download that paper ballot, fill it out, sign it, saying you're a registered voter, because you're going to have to mail that to your Secretary of State's office, who has all the voter registration data, who can see if you're that registered voter. They can then verify that you're a registered voter. They can then count that ballot, scan it to a computer recording system, and archive it. And eventually we'll have all these ballots done on paper made from cannabis instead of old growth trees. And we'll have plastics made from cannabis that are completely non-toxic. And we're going to be living a life in harmony with our natural environment, with clean, because you can't be healthy if you're breathing poisoned air, eating poisoned food, drinking poisoned water. You can't be healthy, and you won't be healthy. And that's why we have epidemics of disease right now. So we fundamentally must change the order of things. And that's what our next broadcast is going to be talking about. So once again, I appreciate your time, and I hope you'll be encouraged to watch the next broadcast. You'll find it to be riveting, because I'm going to have some great pictures that are going to be associated with it that help tell the story. They're kind of like pieces to the puzzle. But when you can see the pictures of the equipment I'm talking about, hydrogen cars, homes, all of that stuff, you'll see it's here now. There's no R&D needed. We just need to get with the program. We need to take charge now, get that ballot downloaded. When the majority of voters in 38 states send in their ballots to their Secretary of State's office, as per Article 5 of the United States Constitution, that amendment will be ratified and be law. And the majority will be in charge. That's what this is all about. Do that now. Put the majority in charge first. Everything else will flow from that. And if you're concerned about the chaos of democracy, there is a country that's actually been operating as a constitutional democracy for nearly 800 years. They codified their constitutional democratic government in writing in the year 1291. And yet, nobody knows about this country. How is that possible? This is a country that is so diverse, it has 4 official languages. And it's never been in a war since the year 1847, I believe. That's the last time they were in a war, in spite of all the countries that surround this country who have been at war. A real democracy that existed long before the U.S. government was formed. And we were never formed as a democracy, we were formed as a republic. We're going to talk about that in our next broadcast. And I'm going to tell you who that country is, because it's important that you don't know. It's got to be deliberate that no one in the news organizations, no one has mentioned it, that there's a democratic country that's been operating successfully since the year 1291. And they were operating successfully long before 1291, before it was codified. They just lived a democratic life. In fact, I'm going to show you evidence that the people that Jesus grew up with, a community called the Essenes. And the only reason we know about the Essene Jesus is because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And people like me like to read that stuff, especially when I found out what was in it. And I'm going to explain to you what was in it. But you're going to find out that Jesus was a real Democrat because the Essenes were real Democrats. And they had a remarkable culture. They were actually a group of scientists and scholars who could read and write. And a major part of the Jewish tradition, they were one of the 3 major groups in that era of time, of the Jewish culture, except they left the big cities, which they found to be highly polluted, and the water was contaminated, people peeing in the river, whatever. All kinds of things. You get too many people together, all kinds of bad things happen. They thought it was corrupt, and so they left the cities and lived in these remote communities. You had to to just get into their society took 3 years, where you had to learn all the important ways to live in terms of what you ate, how you prepared your meals, and naturopathic medicine. And these techniques, because the Essenes could read and write, they could read what Hippocrates was saying in the ancient Greeks that lived hundreds of years before the Essenes. And all of this has been lost. But when you read what the Essene Jesus was doing, you'll find out he was healing all right. But these weren't miracles that violated Newton's laws of physics. These are ancient insights that are, and I say as a molecular biologist, when I read these documents, and I'm going to tell you, and the book, incidentally, that was most revealing is the Essene Gospel of Peace. That's E-S-S-E-N-E, Gospel of Peace. It's one of these remarkable books that's free and online. It's been translated from the original Aramaic, and you can read it pretty quickly, and when you get to the end of it, you would call it a miracle too, the way he was healing these people. I would. Any one of us that would watch what's described in that book would go, oh my God, that's amazing. That's a miracle. But it wasn't. It was good science. And I'm going to tell you all about that too, including the name of that country in our next broadcast. Thanks for listening. We have a lot of important work to do. And it's very depressing stuff, as I pointed out. You know, we've got a mass extinction event going on. It's hard for me to not consider that in everything else I do, but because we got to get ready for it, and I'll show you how in the next broadcast. But if we do get ready for it, we can survive and prosper in the coming dark age, because it's going to be a dark age that's coming. We can't stop it now. We've passed that point of no return. All we can do now is build our arks and our indoor lifeboat food production systems that are going to be able to operate in spite of all this chaos that's coming. Because all the major food production systems in the world, unfortunately, are collapsing. And our population is exploding. And, the crossing of the curves are going to take place soon. We better be ready. If we're not, there's not going to be any survivors. So that's why this is really important. And I look forward to any of your thoughts that you can send. And if you can help us with some contributions, that'll help spread our word. This is an important campaign. It's going to take a number of broadcasts, probably at least a dozen or more, to get the basic core information to you about the healthcare, the educational aspects, what we need to do in terms of U.S. foreign policy. And since I have a detailed history in all of those areas, I think I'm looking forward to sharing that with you, and I'll show you all the truth of the story. And we can make decisions as a group about what our country needs now to do. But we need a revolution, all right, and we need to do it immediately. We don't need to wait for another phony election this November. We need to get that democracy amendment ratified with wartime speed. That, to me, means the minute we get the majority of citizens who are registered voters, who understand this move, this Article 5 move on the congressional chessboard, and then make it. Take that move, take that action, send that ballot in, and put the majority in charge while we still have time to make a difference. It's that simple. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Okay, that's it for now. Thanks again.